So now the next thing, there's one more important concept: how to take the backup of configurations. Because when you're working at the level one as a level one engineer, mostly you don't have permissions, or you don't even know initial configurations. You don't know much. Even if I configure the router, most probably I cannot remember each and every configurations. But if you take the backup of that configurations, suddenly if you lost the router, let's say your router is off now and you try to replace with a new router, so replacing the new router will not help you in making the network up, because once you replace the router, you also need to make sure that you replace the configurations, right? What about the configurations? So if you have taken the backup, then we can easily restore the configurations. So that's what we are going to see here: how to take the backup and restore the iOS as well as configurations. So to make this possible, first thing you need to have a router. So I'm going to take one router here. Let's say this is my router. So any one router, and then there should be a computer here. So I'm going to connect one computer, and that computer should be running TFTP server. Okay, so to take the backup of the configurations, we are going to use something called TFTP here. So we need to have okay. So to make sure that you okay. So I'm going to use a computer here. So you need to have a TFTP server to take the backup or restore the configurations. Like TFTP in the sense, it's a simply a Windows XP operating system. It can be any Windows XP, Windows 7 machine, which is just running one TFTP application. Probably you can download this application from internet. Normally you can download any SolarWinds TFTP, or you can just go with Cisco TFTP server. It's a small application which you can run on it's a very small file. You can just go and search on the Google to find a related TFTP server. So probably you can find the TFTP server on the internet. Okay, so once you install, okay, so once you install this application, so probably you'll find one desktop shortcut. Here you can see one shortcut. Even I got one application, Cisco TFTP server. So once you open this application, you can see this is what TFTP is running. So when you open this application, which means that TFTP is running, and if you close this application, TFTP is not running in your machine. In some vendors, you need to start the TFTP service, especially if you are using some other vendors like so here in this case I have a Cisco TFTP server. So you have to make sure that you minimize that application, or you open that application. Make sure that you minimize the application, which means we can say TFTP is running. If you close this application, TFTP is not running on your PC. So here, so when you talk about Cisco TFTP server, it's just a computer which is configured, which is installed with some TFTP application here. Okay, so that's what it's a TFTP application. So we are going to assign some IP address. So I'm going to assign the IP address of 192.168.1.1, and this is 192.168.1.100. If you can connect to a cross cable, that's more better, or there should be a connectivity between these two things. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy. That's the first thing. There should be a connectivity between the TFTP server, and connectivity should be, they should be able to reach each other. That's the first requirement. And then we need to install an TFTP application on the PC and make sure that it is running on the PC. It is open and minimized. Make sure that you minimize this application. And after that, if you take the backup of iOS, the first important thing, taking the backup of iOS. So even you can simulate the same thing in your packet tracer program here. Like I can simulate the same thing here. What I can do is I can use the same Cisco packet tracer program just to simulate the lab here, how we can simulate the same thing here. But in general, we can take a real router here. So I'm going to take one router, and then I'm going to take one computer, and that computer, generally I'm using some server computer, and then I'm going to provide the connectivity between these two. So I think I'm connecting which port. Let me check the ports. I'm going to connect, I think, F0/0 port. Okay, so I'll try to go and configure on the router 1 with some IP address. So I'll try to just go to interface. I'll try to go on the router, and then I will assign the IP address as 192.168.1.100, and then 255.255.255.0 is the IP address of the router. And then I'll try to go to this router here, IP configuration. I'll try to assign the IP address as 192.168.1.1, and then I'll try to assign the IP address of 192.168.1.100. So now if I try to my computer or server, I can try to ping between the router and the PC. I can see the reply is coming. So the first thing you need to make sure that you should be able to ping to the particular host, that is your TFTP server. So in my case, it is 192.168.1.1 is my TFTP server. Okay, and there should be a TFTP running here. Also, you can just go to config, and you can say TFTP on or off. You can see on off option. On means TFTP is running. By default it is on, so no need to worry. In case of real machines, you need to make sure that you open up this TFTP application, and it should be minimized condition. Okay, so once we configure this, now if you want to take the backup of iOS, because taking the backup of iOS is very important. So if you talk about iOS show flash, so if you lost this iOS, in that case, without iOS, you need to make sure that you take the backup of iOS, so that in case if someone erases the flash or something goes wrong with the with these things, you can make sure that you can get back this iOS. You can reload the iOS. So first thing, we need to take the backup. So to take the backup of iOS, we need to use a copy command. iOS present in the flash, that is a source, and then we need to configure TFTP. So from the flash, I am sending this to TFTP. So once you give this command, it will ask you the address of the remote host. The host address, that is the TFTP server address, is 192.168.1.1, and it will, sorry, I just misconfigured it. Source file name. So source file name is this file name. You have to copy and you have to paste, because copy paste is something which is more easier. Copy TFTP and then file name, and then address of the remote host 192.168.1.1, and the destination file name is same. You can see some exclamatory marks. So this exclamatory mark represents the copying has been done. And in case of real devices, you'll see something called hashes moving on the Cisco TFTP server as well, and you'll see exclamatory marks on the routers as well. So here it has nothing to do with this TFTP right now. And if you want to verify the configurations where it is saved, you can go to PC, and you can just go to config mode TFTP here. I think this is the iOS. This is the iOS which we copied, I think so. Let me check what is that iOS. IMZ, and then 122.28. this one. Okay, so similar way, just I'll do one more time. Flash source file name, you have to give the source file name, this one, and address of the remote host 192.168.1.1, and destination file name, either you can use the same name or just you can use any other name. So I'm just using 2600 just to make it very simple, and then you can see copying is done. So if you try to come back and verify here, you can see this is the name, this is the copy of the file which we copied. Similar way, if you want to revert back, let's say if you want to restore the iOS, suppose suddenly you downloaded some new iOS from Cisco website, and probably you need to upgrade your router with a new version of iOS. So first thing what we need to do is we need to install that from the Cisco website, and you have to copy that in the computer. So in the computer, by default, the files will be stored in the path. Here you can see edit. If you go to options here, you'll find this is the default path which it stores. If you want to change the path, you can even change this path. It's up to the administrator, but by default it will be, the default path will be C program files, like that. But anyway, you can browse and you can change the path from where the router has to copy the files, or where the router has to copy the files, or frame it has from where it has to collect the files. Okay, so now you have to make sure that you copy the file. So whenever you download any Cisco new iOS, you have to make sure that you copy that iOS file name in this folder, whatever the path you define in the TFTP server root directory. You have to copy that particular file in your computer. Okay, and then you have to go to the router. So you have to say copy. So this time I'm copying from TFTP, that is my computer, to flash, because I'm installing the new iOS here. So whenever you do that, it will ask you the remote host address, that is 192.168.1.1, and the file name. Anyway, I don't have any other file name, so I'm just using, assume that 2600 is the actual image which I downloaded from Cisco. Assume like that and press enter. The destination file name also will be used as the same. So if you want to use same, you can just press enter. You can see it has restored. So if you use show flash, you can see both the iOS present in the router. So both the iOS will be present in general. So in general, it will not ask you the message if your available memory is more. So the size of the file is very less and you have more available memory. In case if a router realizes that to upgrade to this iOS, the new iOS, there is no enough memory present in the flash memory, then it will ask you, would you like to erase the older iOS? So when you press enter confirmation, then it will erase the older iOS and it will over upgrade with a new iOS. So you need to be very careful, especially when this process is going on, because if you really stop this process in between, in that case it may affect your routers also. Sometimes you may even lost your flash. So just need to be a little bit more careful when you're doing the backup. So two options: taking the backup of iOS and then restoring the iOS. And similar way, if you want to take the backup of configuration, so here I just did some steps here. When you take the backup of iOS, these are the series of steps, and you have upgrade the iOS source file name, and then you can upgrade the iOS. It will ask you some erasing. So it will ask you the message. Here I have some enough memory, that's the reason it did not ask me. So sometimes it will ask you erase, and then it will erase everything, and then it will again load from this particular server. So similar way, backing up the configurations, because whenever you make any changes, let's say I made some changes in my router and I configured some interfaces, I just configured some passwords, let's say whatever the configurations. So I don't want to lose the configurations. Okay, so better if suddenly the router goes down and you replace with a new router. So replacing and connecting with a new router will not solve your problem. So you have to make sure that the router will be automatically loaded with configurations. So if you want to make sure that the routing configurations will be automatically loaded, in that case you have to make sure that you take the backup of the configurations. So to take the backup, you have to take from startup config, that is your NVRAM, to your TFTP. So I'm going to copy them to TFTP. Sorry, there's no startup configurations because we did not save the configurations. So this time no message, it will ask you the message 192.168.1.1 is the host, and it will by default use r-1 config. That is a default name it will use. So if you just want to use the same name, you can use the same name and press enter. So it will hardly take less than a second to copy this. Even you can see 0.05 seconds to copy that information. So by default, this file again will be stored in the path, whatever the path I discussed. And if you want to get back those configurations with a new router, so minimum you have to configure these things. If you want to get back your configurations, minimum you have to configure this connectivity physically. Make sure that the connectivity comes up, and remaining all the configurations you can automatically load by restore option. So to restore, again you have to use copy. So from TFTP to running config. So when you do that, so it will ask you the host address name 192.168.1.1 and the source file name. If you remember, we used this name r-1 previously. Destination file name, by default it uses running config. Press enter. Now probably you will get all your configurations back. Okay, IP addresses, routing, everything. So if you want to take the backup and restore, this is something more important. So these are the options to restore the iOS and all those things. Okay, so in case if you come across a scenario, finally, in case if let's say if you come across a scenario where your flash is gone, let's say in this case, I can try. I'm not sure whether it works here or not. So I'll try to do something. I'll try to erase some flash. So what I'll do is, if you remember, show flash, I'll try to delete flash, and in that flash I'm going to delete this file, the iOS file. So don't try this in the real routers. So you need to be very careful when you're doing these things. So last thing, in case if you come across a scenario where you lost your iOS completely, and you already have the backup of the iOS, so you need to make sure that you already, if you remember, we took the backup. So I just deleted. Okay, so now I reload the router. So when you reload the router, if there is no flash, so you remember that by default it will try to load the iOS from the flash, and if there is no iOS in the flash, it will try to search a TFTP server. The TFTP server is where you can copy the iOS here and it will load into the router. Not recommended. So it will try to load from here, or finally it will load with a mini iOS in the ROM. So right now there is no flash and there is no TFTP server which is providing the iOS. So that's the reason you'll see ROM on mode again automatically. This system is unable to boot automatically because the boot environment variable needs to set as a bootable image. There is no image for booting process actually. So now I can configure some basic steps to get back your iOS. Like these are some of the commands which are listed here. In case if you come across a scenario, very useful in the real scenarios especially. The first thing you need to say TFTP DNLD, that is download DNLD. So when you give this command, you'll be given some series of commands again, and these are the commands we need to use probably to assign the IP address, because if there's no iOS, then probably you cannot even assign the IP address of that gateway. So we need to identify what should be the IP address of the gateway. So to define that IP address of the gateway, we use IP address option equal to whatever the gateway IP address you decided, just type the IP address. So the router will automatically configure itself as 192.168.1.100 IP address. Similar way, you need to define the subnet mask for that gateway, right? The second option. I'm going to use copy paste those options equal to subnet mask is C class 255.255.255.0, because when you lost your flash, which means you never know what is the IP address, all these things. So when you configure these commands, automatically the router will be assigned the IP address from the ROM on mode, and then just a minute. Okay, so I'm just verifying the configurations here. The IP address for this unit, okay, default gateway, the default gateway for this unit, so it's the same thing. So probably you just need to remember this TFTP DNLD command, and the remaining commands probably you can see the same here. And then the next command you have to use TFTP server. Who is the TFTP server here? So probably you can say TFTP server, this option. Better you copy paste TFTP server. In our example, TFTP server is 192.168.1.1, and then the file name of the TFTP server. If you remember, so probably I need to copy from here. I think so. Sorry. So I need to copy from here TFTP file. So that file name is exactly actually the iOS image. So I'm going to use the C2600 iOS image which already copied. If you remember, already I took the backup of that file. So this is the file which I already took the backup. So I'm going to use that file. And finally you have to say TFTP DNLD. Oh. So sometimes in some of the most of the things it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So probably once you give this commands, when you give this command, you'll see the router gets into setup mode. Do you wish to continue? These are the IP addresses, whatever we configured just now. So invoke this command for disaster recovery only. All the existing data portions on the flash will be lost. So do you want to continue? Once you give S, it will start receiving the iOS image file from the computer if everything you configured correct. If the name of the iOS file is correct, if the TFTP server is correct, subnet mask gateway, everything is correct, you'll start receiving the file, and after that you just need to give a command called reset. You'll see some messages going on, and finally a lot of messages, and after some time you'll see again the command line of the router. Once you receive that command line, you just need to say reset command, and once you give reset command, probably you can get into the router, and you can see the iOS image here. Okay, so these are the disaster recovery of your iOS. In case if you lost your iOS from the flash, you can make some necessary steps to get back your iOS. So these concepts are a little bit more important, like especially these are some of the stages where we take the backup of configurations. So password recovery is something which is more important. If you lost your passwords, then definitely you need to make sure that you revert with the new passwords or override with the new passwords, or try to identify at least the passwords. So we can do this with this series of steps here. In this also we get into Roman mode, but we get into Roman mode wantedly by pressing Ctrl Shift break. But in case of if you don't have iOS, we automatically go into Roman mode automatically. And then backup of iOS and backup of configurations is very important, because iOS is something which is very expensive. If you suddenly lost your iOS, you should be in a position to restore the iOS as well. Okay, or even you need to make sure that you also upgrade with the new iOS and configurations as well. And finally, some disaster recovery in case if you lost your iOS from the flash. Command step by step for configuring IP address to the router and the TFTP server in case for a router which has no iOS in the flash, in order to load the iOS from the PC. So by default the router goes into Roman mode, and if there's no in the flash, that is booting from the RAM. And these are some of the steps we need to follow in these cases. Okay, so probably we'll see in the next session. Okay,